The deep state is panicking right now. Something massive is shifting beneath the surface of the world's economy. Elon Musk just spoke, and what he said about Donald Trump's economic plan is sending shockwaves through Wall Street. He didn't just disagree, he used one word that changes everything: disaster. This isn't about politics. This is about your money and the future of the American dollar. If you don't understand the real threat this plan poses, you stand to lose everything in the coming collapse. Tap that subscribe button right now to join the few who will see this crisis coming and prepare for the next financial era. Comment below with dollar doom if you believe the reign of the fiat currency is finally over. A chill wind blows through the halls of global finance, carrying the unmistakable scent of systemic change, a feeling of deep unease that permeates the air when giants clash over the very foundation of the world economy. It was a statement delivered with the characteristic bluntness of one of the world's most influential figures, a man whose every tweet and every public utterance has the power to move markets and redefine technological trajectories. Elon Musk, the visionary behind Tesla and SpaceX, recently dropped a bombshell by labeling the current administration's proposed economic blueprint, the very framework meant to stabilize and propel the nation, as nothing less than a disaster, a word that cuts through the political rhetoric like a surgical laser, demanding immediate and serious attention from every investor, every market maker, and every citizen dependent on a stable global economy. The timing of Musk's assessment is critically important, coinciding with an increasingly fragile global economic environment where confidence is already stretched thin by persistent inflation, geopolitical tensions, and an unprecedented level of national debt that looms over the nation like a dark, gathering storm cloud. When a figure of Musk's stature, who operates at the bleeding edge of global innovation and holds billions in various currencies and assets, uses such a definitive and alarming term, it cannot be dismissed as mere partisan noise. It signifies a deep, structural concern about the long-term viability and potential catastrophic unintended consequences embedded within the core of the proposed policies. This critique goes far beyond simple policy disagreement, suggesting a fundamental mismatch between the plan's aggressive protectionism and the intricate, hyper-connected reality of the modern global supply chain and monetary system. The core of this disaster, as Musk implies, lies perhaps in the promise of sweeping, dramatic tariffs, a move that, while intended to bolster domestic production and protect local jobs, carries with it the immense risk of igniting global trade wars that could severely destabilize supply chains, raise consumer costs dramatically, and ultimately stifle the innovation and competition necessary for true economic prosperity. Historically, aggressive tariff measures have been correlated with periods of economic contraction and global friction, transforming localized economic challenges into synchronized worldwide slowdowns that spare no one. Furthermore, the sheer weight of the national debt, exacerbated by past spending and future commitments outlined in the plan, threatens to crowd out private investment and place an unsustainable burden on future generations, eroding investor confidence in the dollar's future stability. Musk's focus, driven by his immense investment in globalized industries like electric vehicles and space exploration, is naturally attuned to the fluidity of international trade and the necessity of cross-border collaboration for technological advancement. For his businesses, and indeed for all major multinational corporations, a sudden shift towards economic isolationism and protectionist barriers represents a direct and immediate threat to their operating model, profitability, and their ability to source raw materials efficiently. This is why his warning resonates so strongly. It comes from a perspective that understands the complex, non-linear relationships between policy, technology, and global capital flow, suggesting that the economic plan is not just flawed, but structurally incompatible with the reality of a 21st century, highly integrated global marketplace. The centerpiece of Trump's economic vision that draws the fiercest criticism and likely fuels Musk's disaster label is the proposal for blanket tariffs, a strategy that advocates view as a necessary measure to rebalance trade deficits and revitalize domestic manufacturing, but that critics see as a highly inflationary, self-destructive tactic. The plan calls for significant import taxes across the board, a move that would immediately make nearly every consumer good, from electronics to clothing, substantially more expensive for the average American family, effectively acting as a massive, regressive tax increase on the working class. This is compounded by the explicit intent to use the trade deficit as a primary metric of economic health, a simplification that ignores the complex web of foreign investment, capital flows, and the dollar's role as the world's reserve currency, which inevitably generates current account imbalances. Furthermore, the emphasis on a strong nationalistic economic identity, while appealing to a domestic base, often overlooks the intricate financial ecosystem that has been built around the U.S. dollar over the past 8 decades, an ecosystem that is currently showing significant signs of strain. The plan's confrontational approach to international trade and its willingness to deploy economic weapons against allies and rivals alike accelerates the global push towards what is now undeniable: the slow, deliberate, but increasingly irreversible process of de-dollarization. When major global economic players, such as the BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and its new members, actively seek alternatives for settling international trade, moving towards their own currencies or even commodity-backed instruments, the foundation of American financial dominance begins to crumble. The proposed tax policies, including certain corporate tax cuts and deregulation measures, are intended to spur domestic investment and job creation, yet they are projected to swell the already astronomical national debt further, crossing the $35 trillion mark. It is this sheer scale of accumulating liability that constitutes the quiet, long-term disaster undermining the intrinsic value and global trust in the dollar as a store of value. When a country's debt-to-GDP ratio enters the danger zone, the confidence of foreign creditors and sovereign wealth funds, who hold trillions in U.S. treasuries, begins to waver, and it is their collective decision to hold or dump these assets that dictates the dollar's fate on the international stage. Musk's experience in navigating the capital-intensive world of high-tech manufacturing makes him acutely aware that tariffs are not just a tax on foreign goods. They are a tax on the domestic economy's ability to innovate and compete effectively on a global scale. By raising the cost of imported components and raw materials, which modern manufacturing relies upon, tariffs artificially inflate production costs for American companies, making their final products less competitive internationally and potentially leading to a shift in production to foreign shores to circumvent the barriers. This dynamic is an economic paradox. A policy meant to bring jobs home may, in fact, end up exporting them, demonstrating why a simplistic protectionist approach is structurally incompatible with the intricate, multi-layered reality of modern global commerce and warrants the disaster moniker. The phrase, "the dollar is officially done," though hyperbolic, captures a profound shift in global monetary dynamics that extends far beyond the immediate political wrangling over an economic plan. It reflects a decades-long erosion of faith in fiat currencies, coupled with the deliberate actions of sovereign nations seeking to reduce their dependency on the American financial system. The confidence in the dollar, which has reigned supreme as the world's primary reserve currency since the Bretton Woods Agreement, is primarily founded on 2 pillars: the size and stability of the U.S. economy, and, critically, the U.S. government's commitment to sound fiscal policy. When that commitment is visibly compromised by runaway debt and confrontational trade policies, the collective trust of central banks and global investors, the true guardians of the dollar's status, begins to fracture and dissipate. This accelerating movement away from the dollar, often referred to as de-dollarization, is not a sudden event, but a structural trend propelled by geopolitical necessity and strategic financial planning in capitals around the world. Nations like China and Russia, in particular, are actively working to establish alternative payment systems and encourage trade settlements in local currencies, a shift that is gaining traction among developing economies looking to shield themselves from the coercive power of U.S. financial sanctions. When oil, the commodity that has historically been the bedrock of the petrodollar system, begins to be traded consistently in currencies other than the USD, the fundamental demand for the American currency dramatically decreases, weakening its global exchange value and accelerating domestic inflation. Adding to the dollar's instability is the unprecedented volume of debt that must be constantly rolled over, creating a relentless dependency on continued foreign appetite for U.S. Treasury bonds. The proposed economic plan, by projecting further debt accumulation, signals a lack of fiscal discipline that further spooks international buyers, forcing the Federal Reserve to potentially monetize more of the debt, a process that is nothing less than printing money to pay the nation's bills, which is the most potent and direct inflationary force imaginable. It is this fiscal irresponsibility that transforms the dollar from a reliable store of value into a ticking time bomb, leading to the collective, rational realization among global financial players that diversification away from the USD is not merely an option, but a necessary survival strategy. The global economy is entering a multipolar monetary era, a transition characterized by the increasing acceptance and adoption of new, localized currency blocks and digital payment rails, effectively chipping away at the dollar's monopoly on international trade and reserve holdings. The rise of gold as a preferred central bank reserve asset, with recent reports showing central banks acquiring gold at historically high rates, is a clear, tangible manifestation of this growing distrust in the dollar's long-term stability and a powerful hedge against fiat depreciation. This is the macro-financial context in which Musk's criticism lands, not as an isolated political jab, but as a recognition that the proposed policies accelerate and validate the pre-existing structural decline of the dollar's unchallenged global hegemony, pushing it closer to being merely one currency among many rather than the reserve currency. If the U.S. dollar is indeed officially done, meaning it loses its status as the world's primary medium for trade and reserve holding, a scenario that is looking less like a possibility and more like an inevitability, the subsequent void in the global financial architecture would trigger a tectonic shift, leading to the rapid and necessary emergence of alternative monetary systems and structures. This post-dollar world is not a return to a simpler economic time, but a leap forward into a highly technological, multipolar financial landscape dominated by two primary forces: the inevitable rise of decentralized digital currencies and the state-controlled power of central bank digital currencies, CBDCs. The failure of the dollar would act as a powerful catalyst, forcing governments and individuals to seek new, verifiable, and debt-resistant stores of value. The most prominent beneficiary of this loss of confidence in fiat currencies, especially the dollar, is already proving to be Bitcoin and the broader asset class of decentralized cryptocurrencies. Bitcoin's core value proposition, its fixed supply, its resistance to political manipulation, and its operation outside the control of any single government or central bank, positions it perfectly as a modern digital alternative to gold, a form of digital hard money. As investors and nations flee the instability and inflation risk of over-indebted fiat systems, they will naturally gravitate towards assets like Bitcoin that possess clear, transparent, and enforceable scarcity, viewing it not just as a speculative gamble, but as a necessary safe haven against sovereign debt crises and hyperinflationary pressures. Simultaneously, governments across the globe, alarmed by the potential for a decentralized alternative to completely bypass their control, are aggressively developing their own digital responses, central bank digital currencies, CBDCs. These CBDCs, such as the digital yuan or a potential digital euro, would allow governments to retain full control over the monetary system, offering a direct digital liability of the central bank to the public. While they would offer increased efficiency in payments, they also introduce unprecedented levels of surveillance and control over individual spending, representing a sharp, authoritative alternative to the decentralized freedom offered by assets like Bitcoin. The race to implement these systems reflects the global struggle for future monetary dominance in a post-fiat era. The combination of Musk's powerful critique of a debt-laden, protectionist economic plan and the existing global push towards de-dollarization creates a compelling, urgent narrative. We are standing at the edge of a fundamental monetary paradigm shift, where the very definition of money is being rewritten by technology and geopolitical tension. The next few years will not just be about economic growth. They will be about survival in a world where the old financial rules no longer apply. The failure of the dollar, precipitated by what critics call a disaster of a plan, will inevitably usher in a new era of digital money, compelling everyone to choose between the centralized control of CBDCs and the decentralized freedom of cryptocurrencies, redefining the concept of financial autonomy and national power for generations to come.